The dust swirled in violent eddies as Clara Calloway found herself sprawled on the hard-packed dirt of Sweetwater's Main Street, the sharp sting of gravel biting into her palms. Her threadbare traveling dress was now torn at the knee, her last possession a battered carpet bag tossed carelessly beside her. The boarding house owner's shout still rang in her ears as the door slammed shut behind her, leaving her alone in the merciless June heat of 1876. "And don't come back until you've got what you owe," the man bellowed through the window, his face red with anger. "2 weeks' rent ain't charity, miss." Clara struggled to her feet, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her dirt-smudged cheeks. She had come west with such hopes after her parents' passing left her without a home in Boston. The teaching position promised in the newspaper advertisement had turned out to be filled already a cruel mistake that had cost her nearly every cent she owned. The midday sun beat down relentlessly as townsfolk passed by, their gazes averted in that particular way that spoke of unwillingness to get involved. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her bag, dignity in tatters but determination still burning within her. She would not cry here in the street, she would not. "Excuse me, madam, but it appears you might be in some difficulty." The voice was deep and steady, like the rolling of distant thunder across prairie lands. Clara looked up, squinting against the sun's glare to find a tall figure standing before her. His face was partially shadowed by the wide brim of a well-worn cowboy hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. Before she could respond, he knelt down beside her. In one fluid motion, he gathered both her and her meager belongings into strong arms, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. Clara gasped, one hand instinctively clutching at his leather vest. "Sir." "What are you?" "Name's Quinn Northcott," he said simply, his voice low enough that only she could hear. His eyes met hers directly now, and something in them, a gentle steadiness that belied his rugged appearance, made her words catch in her throat. "And it looks to me like you've been done wrong by Hargrove. Man's got a reputation for taking advantage of folks down on their luck." He shifted her weight in his arms and nodded toward the end of the street where a sturdy wagon stood waiting. "You're coming with me, miss." "Calloway," she managed, finding her voice at last. "Clara Calloway, and I couldn't possibly." A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Calloway, I'm offering you shelter, not impropriety. Got a ranch about 10 miles outside of town with plenty of room and decent work if you're willing." The smile faded, replaced by an expression of surprising sincerity. "You're home now if you'll have it." Something in those words, or perhaps the way he said them, without pity but with genuine concern, broke through Clara's carefully constructed defenses. The tears she'd been fighting spilled over at last, though she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "I don't even know you," she whispered, though she made no move to extricate herself from his arms. "No, madam, you don't," Quinn agreed, beginning to walk toward his wagon. "But I know trouble when I see it, and I know Sweetwater ain't kind to women without means or connections. My sister runs the household at Northcott Ranch. You'll meet her before sundown, and if you find the arrangement unsuitable, I'll bring you straight back tomorrow with enough coin for a week at the hotel." He paused, setting her gently on the wagon bench. "What do you say, Miss Calloway? Willing to trust a stranger for one night?" Clara looked back at the town that had offered her nothing but rejection, then at the man whose unexpected kindness had quite literally lifted her from the dirt. In his weather-worn face, she saw no deceit, only a straightforward offer that might be her last chance. "Yes, Mr. Northcott," she said finally, squaring her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I believe I am." Quinn nodded once, satisfied, and climbed up beside her. As he took the reins and clicked to the horses, Clara couldn't help but wonder if she had just made the wisest decision of her life or the most foolhardy. The wagon rattled away from Sweetwater, each rotation of its wheels carrying Clara further from the life she had known and toward something entirely new. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling grasslands as they traveled, turning the landscape into a sea of gold and amber. Despite her precarious situation, Clara found herself captivated by the wild beauty surrounding them. "First time in Texas?" Quinn asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Clara nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Is it that obvious?" A slight smile curved his lips, though his eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead. "Your accent gives you away. Boston?" "Yes," she admitted, surprised. "How did you know? Spent some time back east during the war. You learn to place folks by their speech." He adjusted his hat against the glare of the setting sun. "What brings a Boston lady all the way to Sweetwater? It's not exactly known for its refinement." Clara hesitated. Her story was not one she enjoyed sharing, filled as it was with loss and disappointment. Yet something about Quinn's straightforward manner encouraged honesty. "My parents died last winter influenza. The family home had to be sold to cover my father's debts." She spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing someone else's misfortune. "I saw an advertisement for a teaching position here." It seemed a new beginning. Quinn's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Hargrove's advertisement, I'm guessing. He's been running that same notice for months, despite the school having a full staff." "Yes," Clara confirmed, anger briefly flashing in her eyes. "I discovered that upon arrival, after spending nearly everything I had on the journey west." "Man ought to be horsewhipped," Quinn muttered. Then, noting her expression, he added more gently, "You're not the first he's tricked, if that's any consolation. He lures people out here, knowing they'll need lodging once they arrive. His wife runs that boarding house you were just evicted from." "A rather effective business strategy," Clara observed dryly. To her surprise, Quinn laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to transform his entire face. "You've got spirit, Miss Calloway. That'll serve you well out here." As they crested a small rise, Quinn pulled the wagon to a halt. "There it is," he said with quiet pride. "Northcott Ranch." Clara leaned forward, taking in the sight before her. Nestled in a verdant valley, the ranch spread out in a harmonious blend of natural beauty and human industry. A substantial two-story house of weathered wood and stone formed the centerpiece, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. A small creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves shimmered silver in the breeze. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Been in the family for nearly 20 years now," Quinn replied, urging the horses forward again. "My father staked his claim right after the Mexican War, built it up from nothing but prairie grass and hope." A shadow passed over his features. "He and my mother are buried on that hill yonder under the old oak." "I'm sorry for your loss," Clara said softly. Quinn acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "It's been 5 years. My sister Abigail and I run things now, along with a handful of good men." He glanced at her. "It's not an easy life, Miss Calloway, but it's a good one." As they approached the main house, Clara could see a slender figure emerge onto the wide front porch. The woman raised a hand to shield her eyes, watching their arrival with evident curiosity. "That'll be Abigail," Quinn said. "Fair warning, she speaks her mind plainly and doesn't stand on ceremony. But you won't find a better friend once she decides she likes you." The wagon rolled to a stop before the house, and Quinn set the brake before jumping down. He came around to Clara's side, offering his hand to help her descend. "Quinn Northcott, who is this you've brought home?" Abigail called as she made her way down the porch steps. She was perhaps a few years older than Clara, with the same storm-gray eyes as her brother, though her hair was several shades lighter than Quinn's dark brown. "Abigail, this is Miss Clara Calloway," Quinn replied, performing the introduction as Clara smoothed her travel-worn dress self-consciously. "Found her being thrown out of Hargrove's place in town, victim of his teaching position scheme." Abigail's expression softened immediately. "That wretched man! I've told Sheriff Miller a dozen times to do something about those advertisements." She extended her hand to Clara with a warm smile. "Welcome to Northcott Ranch, Miss Calloway. You must be exhausted." "Thank you for your hospitality," Clara replied, surprised by the genuine welcome. "I don't wish to impose nonsense," Abigail interrupted, taking Clara's arm. "Any victim of Hargrove's is welcome here. Besides, we could use another pair of hands around the place." She shot a meaningful glance at her brother. Quinn mentioned you were a teacher. I was trained as one, yes, Clara confirmed. Though I never secured a position in Boston. Abigail's eyes lit up. Providence, I've been after Quinn to hire someone to teach the children. We've got 4 ranch hands with young ones, and they're growing up wild as jackrabbits. Quinn removed his hat, running a hand through his hair with a sigh that suggested this was a recurring discussion. Abigail, don't Abigail me, brother, you know I'm right. She turned back to Clara. We can discuss it over supper. For now, let's get you settled. You can use the blue room, it gets lovely morning light. Before Clara could form a response, she found herself being led into the house, Abigail chatting amiably about the ranch and its inhabitants. The interior of the Northcott home was surprisingly refined, simple in design, but comfortable, with solid furniture and touches of beauty that spoke of a woman's influence. Colorful quilts adorned the backs of chairs, pressed wildflowers framed in glass hung on the walls, and the scent of something delicious wafted from the kitchen at the back of the house. This is lovely, Clara said honestly, momentarily forgetting her predicament in the face of such unexpected comfort. Our mother had an eye for making a house a home, Abigail explained, leading her up a wide staircase. I've tried to maintain her standards, though it's a challenge with a house full of cowboys tramping in and out. The blue room, as Abigail had called it, was modest but charming, with whitewashed walls. A simple iron bedstead covered with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and cream, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the valley. The washroom is at the end of the hall, Abigail said, opening a wardrobe to reveal several dresses. These might be a bit large on you, but they'll do until we can see about getting your things cleaned and mended. Supper's at 6 sharp. She paused at the door. Quinn doesn't bring strays home often, Miss Calloway. He must have seen something special in you. Before Clara could formulate a response to this startling statement, Abigail was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the fading light of day streaming through the window. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the swift change in her circumstances. Hours earlier, she had been facing destitution on the streets of an unfamiliar town. Now she sat in a comfortable bedroom in a ranch house miles from anywhere, offered shelter and potentially employment by strangers whose kindness defied explanation. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to the empty room, uncertain whether to feel relieved or apprehensive about the path that lay before her. Supper at the Northcott Ranch proved to be a lively affair. The large oak table in the dining room seated not only Quinn and Abigail, but also 4 ranch hands who, Clara learned, took their evening meals at the main house. They were introduced as Miguel, the ranch foreman, Emmett, who oversaw the cattle, Franklin, responsible for the horses, and Tom, the youngest at perhaps 22, who seemed to handle whatever tasks the others assigned him. The men had clearly been informed of Clara's presence, for they were freshly washed, their hair slicked down with water, and they treated her with a courteous deference that suggested Abigail had issued strict instructions regarding their behavior. Still, their curiosity was evident in the glances they cast her way throughout the meal. Miss Calloway was to be a teacher in Sweetwater, Abigail announced as platters of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans were passed around the table. I've been telling Quinn for months that we ought to establish a proper school here for the children. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. My Rosalinda is 7 now. She helps her mother with the little ones, but she should be learning her letters. And Emmett's boys are turning wild as coyotes without proper schooling, Franklin added with a grin toward his friend. Emmett, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, shrugged good-naturedly. They take after their father, I reckon. Quinn, seated at the head of the table, had remained silent during this exchange, but now he leaned forward slightly. It's not a decision to be made hastily, he said, his gaze meeting Clara's. Miss Calloway might not wish to remain in our company long enough to take on such responsibilities. Clara felt the weight of all eyes turned to her. I'm grateful for your hospitality, she began carefully, but Mr. Northcott is right, we hardly know one another. Well, that's easily remedied, Abigail declared brightly. "Quinn, why don't you show Miss Calloway around the ranch tomorrow? Let her see what life here is truly like." Quinn's expression suggested he recognized his sister's matchmaking efforts, but was choosing not to comment on them directly. "If Miss Calloway is interested, I'd be happy to," he replied evenly. "I would appreciate that," Clara said, surprising herself with the realization that she genuinely wanted to learn more about this place and its people. "Though I wouldn't wish to keep you from your work." A hint of a smile played at the corner of Quinn's mouth. "Part of my work is knowing every inch of this land, Miss Calloway. It's no hardship to share it with someone who might appreciate it." The conversation shifted then to ranch matters, cattle prices, the condition of the South pasture, and plans for the coming roundup. Clara listened with interest, gradually forming a picture of the operation Quinn and his sister managed. It was clearly substantial, though not on the scale of the cattle empires she had read about in Eastern newspapers. After the meal, when the men had departed to the bunkhouse and Abigail was occupied in the kitchen, Clara found herself alone with Quinn on the front porch. The night was clear, with a canopy of stars stretching from horizon to horizon in a display more magnificent than anything she had witnessed in Boston. "It's breathtaking," she murmured, gazing upward. Quinn leaned against a post, his profile outlined in the soft light spilling from the windows behind them. "One of the compensations for being so far from civilization," he agreed, "though I suspect some might consider that a matter of perspective, meaning that what constitutes civilization varies depending on who you ask." He turned to face her more directly. "I've been to your Boston, Miss Calloway, saw plenty that seemed uncivilized to my eyes, though it was dressed in fine clothes and grand architecture." Clara could not disagree. Her last months in Boston had revealed the cruelty that often lurked beneath polite society's veneer. Her father's former business associates had quickly distanced themselves when financial ruin loomed, and family friends had offered condolences but little practical assistance. "Perhaps true civilization lies in how people treat one another rather than in external trappings," she suggested. Quinn studied her for a long moment. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Calloway." "I could say the same of you, Mr. Northcott," she replied. "It's not every day a stranger lifts a woman from the street and offers her a home." Something flickered in his eyes at her choice of words, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. "I did what anyone would do." "No," Clara said softly but firmly, "you didn't." "Most people walked past and pretended not to see." Quinn shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "I should check the horses before turning in," he said, straightening. "Rest well, Miss Calloway. Morning comes early on a ranch." "Good night, Mr. Northcott," she replied, sensing his retreat and allowing it. "And thank you for everything." He nodded once, his expression unreadable in the shadows, then descended the porch steps and disappeared into the darkness. Clara remained for several minutes more, breathing in the night air scented with grass and distant rain, wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. When she finally retired to the blue room, she found that Abigail had laid out a nightgown and left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand. Such simple thoughtfulness after weeks of indifference in Sweetwater nearly brought tears to her eyes. As Clara prepared for bed, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who gazed back at her seemed different, somehow less defeated than the one who had arrived in Sweetwater with naive hopes, yet not quite as confident as the one who had left Boston months ago. She was something in between, something still forming. "You're home now," Quinn had said. The words echoed in her mind as she slipped beneath the quilt, its weight comforting rather than restrictive. Could this remote ranch truly become her home? And what of the man who had brought her here, the quiet cowboy with perceptive eyes and unexpected depth sleep, claimed her before she could pursue these thoughts further, bringing her the first truly restful night she had experienced since leaving Boston. Dawn arrived with a chorus of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Clara woke feeling more refreshed than she had in weeks, the quality of light filtering through the curtains confirming Abigail's assertion about the room's pleasant morning exposure. She dressed quickly in one of the borrowed dresses, a simple blue calico that, while somewhat loose in the bodice, fit well enough once belted, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was already a hub of activity. Abigail stood at the large cast iron stove, expertly flipping pancakes while simultaneously directing a young Mexican woman in the preparation of eggs and bacon. A child of about 7 sat at the kitchen table, carefully setting out plates and utensils. "Good morning," Clara said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Miss Calloway, you're up early," Abigail greeted her warmly. "This is Maria, Miguel's wife, and their daughter Rosalinda. They help with the cooking and housekeeping." Maria offered a shy smile and a nod, while Rosalinda regarded Clara with unabashed curiosity. "Are you really a teacher?" the girl asked, abandoning her task to approach Clara. "Rosalinda," her mother admonished softly in accented English, "mind your manners." "It's quite all right," Clara assured them both, kneeling to meet the child at eye level. "Yes, I was trained as a teacher in Boston. Do you like to learn, Rosalinda?" The girl nodded vigorously, her dark braids bouncing. "Papa teaches me some letters, and Miss Abigail showed me numbers. But I want to read books like the ones in the parlor." "That's an excellent ambition," Clara said sincerely, charmed by the child's earnestness. "Perhaps you could show Miss Calloway what you know after breakfast," Abigail suggested. "But for now, finish setting the table, please. The men will be in shortly, and they're always hungry as bears after morning chores." Rosalinda returned to her task with renewed purpose, casting occasional glances at Clara as though to ensure she was making a good impression. Clara moved to help, but Abigail intercepted her. "Guests don't work for their breakfast," she said, pressing a cup of coffee into Clara's hands. "Though if you're planning to stay, that will change soon enough." Her tone was light, but her eyes held a question. "I haven't decided yet," Clara admitted. "But I appreciate the chance to consider my options." Abigail nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. "Quinn mentioned showing you around today. It's good timing, we're between major work phases at present. Once the fall roundup begins, there'll be little time for leisure." Before Clara could reply, the back door swung open and the ranch hands filed in, bringing with them the sense of morning air, horse, and honest labor. Quinn entered last, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His eyes found Clara immediately, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the quiet approval in his gaze. "Miss Calloway," he greeted her with a slight nod. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and hastily arranged hair. "Quinn, I've told Miss Calloway you'll show her the ranch today," Abigail interjected, ushering everyone toward the dining room where breakfast awaited. "Perhaps start with the north pasture. The wildflowers are particularly fine this year." Quinn cast his sister a look that suggested he recognized her romantic notions but was choosing to indulge them. "The north pasture it is, then," he agreed mildly, "if that suits you, Miss Calloway." "It sounds lovely," Clara replied honestly, finding herself looking forward to learning more about the land that had captured Quinn's evident devotion. Breakfast was a hearty affair, with conversation flowing easily around subjects ranging from a new foal born overnight to the prospects for rain in the coming week. Clara observed the interactions with interest, noting the respectful camaraderie between Quinn and his men, as well as the clear affection between all members of this extended ranch family. When the meal concluded, Quinn rose from his place at the head of the table. "Ready for that tour, Miss Calloway?" Clara nodded, excusing herself to retrieve a shawl from her room. When she returned, she found Quinn waiting on the porch with 2 saddled horses, a sturdy bay gelding and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "I hope you ride," he said, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features for the first time since she'd met him. "I do," Clara assured him, approaching the mare with confidence. "Though it's been some time since I've had the opportunity." Relief flickered in Quinn's eyes. "Buttercup here has a smooth gait and a kind disposition. She'll take good care of you." With practiced ease that belied her years away from the saddle, Clara mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Quinn swung onto his own horse with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. "We'll start with the homestead buildings," he said, guiding his mount at a walk toward the cluster of structures surrounding the main house. "Then head out to see some of the range." The morning passed pleasantly as Quinn showed Clara the various aspects of ranch operations. He explained the function of each building: the barn with its hayloft and adjoining smithy, the smokehouse where meat was preserved, the springhouse that kept dairy products cool, and the bunkhouse where the unmarried ranch hands lived. They visited the corrals where several magnificent horses watched them with pricked ears, and the small but thriving vegetable garden that Abigail maintained with Maria's help. Throughout their tour, Quinn spoke with quiet pride about the ranch and its workings. Clara found herself drawn not just to the beauty of the place, but to the obvious care and thought that went into its management. "You seem to have considered everything," she remarked as they rode past a series of irrigation ditches that channeled water from the creek to distant fields. "Trial and error, mostly," Quinn replied. "My father made plenty of mistakes in the early years, nearly lost everything during a drought in '59, taught him and later me not to take water for granted." "Is that why you didn't expand further?" Mr. Hargrove mentioned some of the larger ranches run tens of thousands of cattle. Quinn's expression darkened slightly at the mention of Hargrove. "Those operations are gambling with nature, Miss Calloway. Too many cattle strip the land bare. When drought comes, and it always does, eventually they die by the hundreds." He gestured toward a distant herd grazing contentedly. "We keep our numbers manageable, means we weather the hard times better than most." "A philosophy that extends beyond ranching, perhaps," Clara suggested. Quinn glanced at her sharply, as though surprised by her insight. "Perhaps," he agreed after a moment. "My father used to say a man who knows his limits lives longer than one who's always pushing boundaries. Course, he was something of a boundary pusher himself in his younger days." "And you?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "Do you take after your father in that regard?" A smile tugged at the corner of Quinn's mouth. "Abigail would say I'm even more stubborn than he was, though less inclined to risk what we've built." He guided his horse toward a gentle rise. "Come, there's something I want to show you." They rode in companionable silence until they reached the top of the hill. There, Quinn reined his mount to a halt and gestured toward the panoramic view spread before them. From this vantage point, Clara could see the entirety of Northcott Ranch, the house and outbuildings now appearing small in the distance, the meandering creek with its border of trees, the carefully maintained pastures, and beyond them, the vast expanse of untamed prairie stretching to the horizon. "It's magnificent," she breathed, understanding now why someone would choose this life with all its hardships and isolation. "This is what my father saw when he first came here," Quinn said quietly. "Nothing but grass and sky and possibility." He dismounted, moving to help Clara down from her horse. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary before he stepped back. They stood side by side, looking out over the land. A warm breeze carried the scent of sun-warmed grass and wildflowers, and in the distance, a hawk circled lazily on thermal currents. "What do you think of our little corner of Texas so far, Miss Calloway?" Quinn asked, his voice carrying a note of something Clara couldn't quite identify: hope, perhaps, or concern for her judgment. "I think it's beautiful," she answered honestly, "and I'm beginning to understand why you love it so much." Quinn turned to face her fully then, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And could you see yourself here, not just visiting, but staying?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to articulate. Clara knew he was asking about more than just her potential role as a teacher for the ranch children. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "A week ago, I couldn't have imagined myself anywhere but back in Boston, trying to rebuild what I'd lost. But now," she looked out again at the landscape. "Now I find myself considering possibilities I never expected." Quinn nodded, seeming to understand all she wasn't saying. "Fair enough, some decisions shouldn't be rushed." He gestured toward a stand of trees nearby. "I packed some lunch if you're hungry." The simple picnic Quinn had prepared thick slices of bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples tasted better to Clara than any formal dinner she'd attended in Boston. They ate beneath the shade of a massive oak, seated on a blanket Quinn had rolled behind his saddle. Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics from books they had read to memories of their respective childhoods. Clara found herself sharing stories she had nearly forgotten: summer afternoons spent reading in her father's library, winter evenings when her mother taught her to sew by lamplight. In turn, Quinn spoke of learning to ride almost before he could walk, of following his father through the pastures as a boy, absorbing lessons about land and livestock that would shape his future. "And Abigail," Clara asked, "has she always been so determined?" Quinn suggested with a wry smile. "Yes, from the cradle, according to our mother. She was managing the household by 15 after mother fell ill. Could have married a dozen times over, had offers from ranchers with twice our acreage, but she's never found a man she couldn't outthink and outlast." His expression softened with evident affection. "She's the backbone of Northcott Ranch, though I'd never admit that to her face." "You're fortunate to have each other," Clara observed, a hint of wistfulness in her voice. As an only child, she had often longed for the kind of sibylline bond she now witnessed between Quinn and Abigail. "I know it," Quinn agreed soberly. "The war taught me that much, if nothing else." He was silent for a moment, his gaze distant, and Clara sensed he was seeing something far removed from the peaceful scene before them. Lost too many friends to take family for granted. Clara wanted to ask more about his experiences during the conflict that had torn the nation apart just over a decade earlier, but something in his expression suggested the topic remained painful. Instead, she gently steered the conversation back to the present. "Tell me more about the children you hope I might teach," she said. "Besides Rosalinda, how many are there?" Quinn seemed grateful for the change of subject. "8 altogether, ranging from 5 to 12 years old. Emmett has 3 boys, Franklin has a son and daughter, and Tom's brother lives on the property with his wife and their twin girls." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Most can already manage basic sums and recognize some letters, thanks to Abigail's efforts, but a proper education has been beyond our reach. And you're willing to invest in that. Many would consider it unnecessary for ranch children, particularly the girls." Quinn's expression turned serious. "My father believed education was never wasted, regardless of gender or circumstances. Said an educated mind was the one tool that couldn't be taken from you." He met her gaze directly. "I share that conviction." Clara felt a surge of respect for this man who, despite his frontier surroundings, held such progressive views. "Then I would be honored to teach them," she said, making her decision in that moment, "if you're certain you wish to employ me." The smile that transformed Quinn's face made something flutter in Clara's chest. "I think we can arrange suitable terms," he said, reaching out to briefly cover her hand with his own. "Abigail will be delighted." They lingered beneath the oak, longer than perhaps either had intended, their conversation ranging from practical matters regarding the proposed school to more personal reflections. By the time they gathered the remains of their picnic and mounted their horses for the return journey, the sun had begun its westward descent, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. As they rode side by side toward the ranch house, Clara felt a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she had a clear purpose and, perhaps more importantly, a place where she might belong. Quinn watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the small smile that played about her lips as she gazed at the land that had become his life's work. Something shifted in his chest at the sight, a recognition that, in rescuing her from the streets of Sweetwater, he might have found something he hadn't known he was seeking. The weeks that followed saw Clara settling into life at Northcott Ranch with surprising ease. A small building that had once served as a tax storage room was cleaned out and transformed into a schoolhouse, complete with a proper blackboard Quinn ordered from San Antonio and desks fashioned by Miguel, who proved to be a skilled carpenter. Clara threw herself into preparations for her new role, developing lessons appropriate for each child's age and ability. Abigail provided what books the ranch already possessed and wrote to relatives back east requesting more. Quinn himself contributed a magnificent atlas he'd purchased years earlier, showing lands and peoples Clara's young students had never imagined. Each morning, the children gathered at the schoolhouse, arriving on foot or horseback depending on their age and the distance from their family's quarters. Clara found herself looking forward to these sessions, delighting in her pupils' curiosity and eagerness to learn. Even the oldest boy, 12-year-old James Franklin, who had initially affected disinterest in book learning, was soon bringing her interesting rocks and insects to identify and catalog. In the afternoons, after school had concluded, Clara helped Abigail and Maria with household tasks. She learned to make soap from rendered fat and lye, to preserve summer vegetables for winter consumption, and to manage the endless mending required by a household of hard-working men. Though the work was often physically demanding, she found satisfaction in these practical skills that had never been part of her Boston upbringing. Evenings were for gathering on the porch when weather permitted or around the large fireplace in the parlor when it didn't. Sometimes Quinn read aloud from newspapers or books while the others listened and worked on various handcrafts. Other times, Miguel would bring his guitar and play tunes ranging from Spanish ballads to popular American songs. Occasionally, when coaxed, Abigail would sing in a clear, sweet voice that belied her practical nature. Throughout these communal activities, Clara often found her gaze drawn to Quinn. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, the gentleness of his massive hands when he assisted Rosalinda with a difficult knot in her embroidery thread, the quiet authority he projected without apparent effort. He carried his responsibilities with a steadiness that Clara increasingly admired, and she was beginning to admit to herself desired. For his part, Quinn seemed to seek out her company with growing frequency. He began stopping by the schoolhouse during lunch breaks, ostensibly to check on the building's condition but lingering to discuss the children's progress or share some small discovery from his morning rounds: a newly bloomed wildflower, an interesting bird's nest, tracks of animals she had never seen. On Sundays, when no formal classes were held, he often invited her to ride out with him to check fence lines or visit distant pastures. These excursions became Clara's favorite part of each week, opportunities to explore more of the ranch's varied terrain and, more importantly, to know Quinn better away from the watchful eyes of the ranch community. It was during one such Sunday ride, nearly 2 months after her arrival at Northcott Ranch, that their relationship shifted irrevocably. They had ventured to a remote corner of the property, a hidden valley where a small tributary of the main creek formed a deep, clear pool surrounded by cottonwoods and willows. Dismounting, they allowed their horses to drink while they settled on a sun-warmed rock at the water's edge. "I used to come here as a boy when I wanted to escape Abigail's supervision," Quinn confessed, smiling at the memory. "Found it by accident while tracking a lost calf, became my secret place until my father followed me one day." His expression softened. "Instead of scolding me for wandering off alone, he showed me how to identify the different fish in the pool and taught me to catch them with my hands." "A good father," Clara observed, touched by the obvious affection in Quinn's voice. "The best," Quinn agreed. "Strict when needed, but fair always." He glanced at her. "What about yours? You've spoken little of him." Clara looked out across the water, gathering her thoughts. "He was complicated. Brilliant at business when things went well, but prone to excessive optimism that sometimes led to poor decisions." She traced patterns in the rock with her fingertip. "He loved my mother and me deeply, though, never doubted that, even when his choices made life difficult." Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Most fathers are trying their best with the knowledge they have," he said. "Mine included." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I wonder sometimes what kind of father I would be." The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken as Quinn's gaze held hers, a new intensity in his storm-gray eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "you would be very much like your own father. Fair and kind, but not afraid to set boundaries." "High praise," Quinn murmured, shifting slightly closer to her on the rock. "And what of you, Clara? Have you thought of motherhood?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Yes," she admitted softly, "though circumstances haven't favored that path thus far." Quinn's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the sun-warmed stone. "Circumstances can change," he said, his voice low and gentle, sometimes quite unexpectedly. Clara looked up at him, at this man who had literally lifted her from the dirt and offered her not just shelter but purpose and community. In his weathered face, she saw kindness, integrity, and now something else, a yearning that matched the one growing within her own heart. "Quinn," she began, scarcely knowing what she intended to say. Before she could continue, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His hand came up to cup her cheek with exquisite care, as though she were something precious and fragile. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you get back on your feet in Sweetwater," he confessed. "Knew it was too soon, knew you needed time to find your footing, but Clara—" He drew back slightly to meet her gaze. "I'm hoping you might consider making Northcott Ranch your permanent home. Not just as our teacher, but as your wife," Clara finished when he hesitated. Quinn nodded, a vulnerability in his expression she had never seen before. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely 2 months. If you need more time," Clara silenced him with a kiss of her own, pouring into it all the growing affection and admiration she had been carefully guarding. When she pulled away, she was smiling through tears that had gathered in her eyes. "Sometimes," she said softly, echoing his earlier words, "circumstances change quite unexpectedly. And sometimes, what seems sudden to the world has been building within 2 hearts for longer than either realized." Joy bloomed across Quinn's face, transforming him in an instant from the serious rancher to a man alight with happiness. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his hands cradling hers as though they were the most precious things he had ever held. "Yes," Clara confirmed, laughing as he pulled her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the ground. "Yes, Quinn Northcott, I will marry you." He set her down gently, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "Belonged to my mother," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for when I found a woman strong enough for this life, but gentle enough to make it worth living." His eyes met hers with quiet certainty. "He would have approved of you, Clara Calloway." As Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara felt as though everything in her life, the losses and disappointments, the journey west, even being thrown into the street in Sweetwater, had been leading her to this moment. This man, this future stretching before them like the endless Texas sky. The news of their engagement was met with varying degrees of surprise at the ranch. Abigail merely smiled knowingly and embraced Clara with genuine warmth. "I've been hoping for this since the day he brought you home," she confessed. "Quinn deserves happiness, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The ranch hands offered hearty congratulations, though Clara suspected Miguel had won some sort of wager based on the coins that surreptitiously changed hands that evening. The children were uniformly delighted, with Rosalinda immediately volunteering to be a flower girl, and the older boys good-naturedly enduring teasing about whether they would need to address their teacher as Mrs. Northcott after the wedding. Plans were made for a ceremony in mid-October, after the fall roundup concluded but before winter weather complicated travel for those guests coming from farther afield. Abigail wrote to cousins and old friends, while Quinn rode into Sweetwater to personally invite the minister and his wife, along with the few townspeople he considered genuine friends. "What about your family in Boston?" Quinn asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Is there anyone you'd wish to invite?" Clara shook her head, leaning slightly against his solid warmth. "No living relatives, and our former social circle made it abundantly clear they considered my family's misfortunes a contagion to be avoided." She glanced up at him. "My family is here now." Quinn's arm tightened around her shoulders and he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Yes," he agreed softly. "You're home now." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Clara continued teaching the children each morning, while afternoons were increasingly devoted to preparations for the ceremony and her future life as Quinn's wife. Abigail helped her adapt several dresses to better fit her smaller frame, and supervised the creation of a simple but lovely wedding gown sewn from fine cream-colored fabric ordered from San Antonio. Quinn, meanwhile, threw himself into completing projects around the ranch before the demands of the roundup consumed his time. He personally repaired and repainted the small cabin a quarter-mile from the main house where he and Clara would live after their marriage, close enough to be part of the ranch community, but offering the privacy a newly wedded couple would appreciate. "It was the original homestead," he explained as he showed Clara the improvements. "My parents lived here when they first arrived before building the main house, been using it for storage these past years, but—" He trailed off as Clara moved through the space, taking in the freshly whitewashed walls, the polished wood floors, the new curtains Abigail had sewn hanging at the windows. Though modest in size, the cabin featured a cozy parlor, a kitchen with a modern cookstove, and a bedroom where Quinn had installed a beautiful bed frame crafted by Miguel from local hardwood. "It's perfect," she said sincerely, turning to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Our home." Something fierce and tender flashed in Quinn's eyes. In 2 strides, he crossed the room and gathered her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent than the careful embraces they had shared thus far. Clara responded with equal fervor, her hands sliding up his chest to curl around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. 17 more days, he murmured, a mixture of anticipation and resignation in his voice. Clara smiled, understanding his meaning perfectly. They had agreed to observe propriety until their wedding night, though such restraint grew more challenging with each passing day. 17 days, she echoed, pressing one more quick kiss to his lips before stepping back. But who's counting? The fall roundup began in late September, temporarily separating them as Quinn, and most of the ranch hands spent long days gathering cattle from distant pastures, counting, branding late calves, and preparing selected animals for the drive to market. Clara caught only glimpses of her fiancé during this period, exhausted meals at day's end, brief moments when he would stop by the schoolhouse to wish her good morning before riding out at dawn. Despite missing his company, she appreciated this glimpse into the rhythm of ranch life and the demands that would shape their future together. Quinn had never pretended that being a rancher's wife would be easy, and Clara had no illusions about the challenges ahead. Yet watching the coordinated efforts of the ranch community during this crucial time only strengthened her conviction that she had found where she belonged. The roundup concluded 3 days before the wedding, with Quinn and his men successfully delivering a healthy herd to the buyers from Fort Worth. Their return to the ranch was marked by celebration, a special dinner prepared by Abigail, Maria, and Clara, followed by music and even dancing in the yard under the stars. Clara watched with affectionate amusement as Quinn was cajoled into demonstrating dance steps to the older children, his usual reserve melting away in the festive atmosphere. When Miguel struck up a waltz, Quinn made his way to Clara's side and extended his hand with formal courtesy. "May I have this dance, Miss Calloway?" he asked, eyes twinkling. "One of our last before you become Mrs. Northcott." "I would be delighted, Mr. Northcott," she replied, placing her hand in his and allowing him to lead her into the cleared space serving as a dance floor. Quinn proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. He guided Clara through the waltz with confident steps, holding her perhaps a bit closer than strict propriety dictated, though no one present seemed inclined to object. "Where did you learn to dance so well?" Clara asked as they moved in perfect harmony to Miguel's music. "My mother insisted," Quinn replied, the memory bringing a smile to his lips. "Said no son of hers would grow up to be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings, frontier or no frontier." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Never thought I'd be grateful for those lessons until this moment." As they circled the improvised dance floor, Clara caught sight of Abigail watching them with undisguised satisfaction. The older woman raised her cup in a small toast when their eyes met, her approval warming Clara's heart. In the 2 months since her arrival at Northcott Ranch, Abigail had become the sister Clara had never had, offering guidance, friendship, and unfailing support. The night of celebration stretched long into the evening, but eventually the children were ushered off to bed. The older ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse, and even Abigail bid them good night with a meaningful glance that suggested they shouldn't linger too long alone in the moonlight. Left to themselves on the porch, Quinn drew Clara into his arms, his kiss conveying all the longing that had built during their separation. "3 more days," he murmured against her lips. "3 more days," she agreed, allowing herself to melt against him for a moment before reluctantly stepping back. "And then a lifetime." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, as though nature itself approved the union. Clara woke in the blue room that had been her home these past months, knowing that by nightfall she would be sleeping in the cabin as Quinn's wife. The thought brought a blush to her cheeks and a flutter of nervous anticipation to her stomach. Abigail arrived shortly after sunrise, bearing a breakfast tray and practical advice for the day ahead. She helped Clara bathe and dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers from the garden. When Clara finally stood before the mirror in her wedding gown, she scarcely recognized the woman who gazed back at her poised, radiant, her eyes bright with happiness. "You look beautiful," Abigail said softly, adjusting the simple veil. "Quinn won't know what hit him." The ceremony itself was held in the ranch yard, which had been transformed under Abigail's direction. Wooden benches arranged in neat, rows faced an arch constructed of branches and decorated with late blooming wildflowers. The ranch's entire extended family was present, along with a dozen or so guests from Sweetwater and neighboring properties. Clara would later remember the day in fragments of perfect clarity. Rosalinda solemnly scattering flower petals before her, the expression on Quinn's face as she walked toward him on Miguel's arm, the gentle weight of her mother's lace handkerchief tucked into her sleeve, the minister's weathered hands as he joined theirs together, the cool metal of the wedding band as Quinn slipped it onto her finger, the cheers that erupted as they sealed their vows with a kiss. The celebration that followed was joyous but simple, a feast prepared by the combined efforts of the ranch women, music provided by Miguel and 2 friends from a neighboring property, dancing that continued until the sun began to set. Throughout it all, Quinn remained at Clara's side, his hand often finding hers as though reassuring himself that she was truly there, truly his. As twilight deepened, the newlyweds slipped away amid good-natured teasing from the ranch hands and knowing smiles from the older married couples. Quinn had arranged for their belongings to be moved to the cabin earlier in the day, and a lamp had been lit in the window, guiding them home. At the cabin door, Quinn paused, turning to Clara with an expression both tender and solemn. "Tradition demands I carry you across the threshold," he said, a question in his eyes. Clara smiled up at him, remembering their first meeting, how he had lifted her from the street with such unexpected gentleness. "I believe we've established that you're more than capable," she replied softly. With a grin that transformed his features, Quinn swept her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Northcott," he said as he carried her into the cabin that would be the center of their new life together. Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Clara's head resting on Quinn's chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart, She reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place. From the depths of loss in Boston to destitution in Sweetwater to finding love and purpose on a Texas ranch, none of it could have been predicted or planned. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his voice a low rumble beneath her ear as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes being thrown into the street can lead to unexpected blessings," she replied, pressing a kiss to his skin. Quinn's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made bringing you home that day," he murmured, "though I'll admit my intentions weren't entirely altruistic even then." Clara raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, curious. No, in the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, she could see his smile, a rare, unguarded expression that revealed the depth of his feelings. "There was something about you, standing there with your chin up despite everything. I wanted to know that woman, to see what she would do with a fair chance." His hand came up to caress her cheek. "Never imagined she would choose to share my life." "I believe," Clara said, leaning down to kiss him, "we chose each other." The years that followed proved the truth of Clara's words. Together, she and Quinn built a life that encompassed far more than either had imagined alone. The small school she had established grew to serve not only the ranch children, but those from neighboring properties as well. With Quinn's encouragement, she eventually hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from San Antonio with formal training, who brought new ideas and methodologies to their rural classroom. Quinn, meanwhile, continued to develop Northcott Ranch with innovative practices that earned him a reputation as one of the most forward-thinking cattlemen in the region. He experimented with new breeding techniques, implemented soil conservation methods learned from agricultural journals Clara ordered from back east, and established a modest but profitable horse breeding program focused on animals suited to the demands of ranch work. Their family grew as well. Elizabeth Abigail Northcott arrived exactly 9 months after their wedding, her birth heralded by a spring thunderstorm that Quinn swore she mimicked in both volume and intensity. 2 years later, Thomas Quinn followed a quieter soul with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's love of books. Their youngest, Michael James, completed the family 3 years after that, combining his siblings' traits into a unique personality that kept his parents alternately laughing and exasperated. Through it all, the inevitable hardships of ranch life, the joy of watching their children grow, the gradual expansion of their community and influence, Quinn and Clara remained partners in the truest sense. They faced each challenge together, celebrated each success as a shared victory, and found in each other the strength to persevere when circumstances turned against them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Clara by taking her back to the hidden pool where he had proposed. Now in their middle years, they rode more sedately than in their youth, but with the comfortable companionship of two people who had traversed many miles together, both literally and figuratively. The pool remained much as Clara remembered it, though Quinn had made one significant addition in the intervening years, a small, sturdy bench positioned to catch the afternoon sun and provide a view of the water. They sat there now, hands intertwined, watching dragonflies skim across the surface and listening to the gentle rustling of cottonwood leaves above them. "Happy?" Quinn asked simply, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes deepening as he smiled at her. Clara considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked it. "Profoundly," she answered, squeezing his hand. "You, beyond measure," he replied, bringing their joined hands to his lips, "though I still wonder sometimes." "What?" she prompted when he fell silent. Quinn's expression turned reflective. "What would have happened if I hadn't been in Sweetwater that day? If I'd left town an hour earlier or later, never seen Hargrove throw you out?" It was a question they had discussed before over the years, the role of chance or providence in bringing them together. Clara had her own theory, which had solidified with time. "I believe we would have found each other anyway," she said with quiet certainty. "Perhaps not as quickly or in the same circumstances, but eventually." She smiled at his skeptical look. Two people meant to build a life together will find their way to each other, one way or another. Quinn chuckled, the sound warm with affection. My practical wife, revealing a romantic heart after all these years. Not romantic, Clara corrected him. Simply observant. Look at all we've created together, this ranch, our children, the school. None of it would exist in quite the same way if we hadn't found each other. She leaned against his shoulder, content. Some things are meant to be, Quinn Northcott. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the pool and surrounding trees, Quinn wrapped his arm around his wife's shoulders. 20 years had passed since he had lifted a dusty, defiant woman from the streets of Sweetwater and told her she was home. In those years, they had transformed a simple statement into a profound truth, creating together a home that was not just a place but a shared life, built on love, respect, and mutual purpose. "You're still home," Quinn murmured against Clara's hair, echoing his words from that first day. Clara turned her face up to his, the years falling away as their eyes met. "Always," she promised, and sealed it with a kiss as enduring as the land around them and the love they had cultivated upon it.